And joining us now to discuss the end of an era, here's David Miller, the outgoing mayor of Toronto. Nice to have you here.
Yeah, it's terrific to be on, Steve.
You know what? I was looking back at the record, and let's put this graphic up if we can, Michael. The longest-serving mayors in the history of this city. And at the top of the list, number one, Art Eggleton with 10 years in. Who's number two? You are. David Miller, 7 years. Tied with Nathan Phillips. They named a square after him. Mel Lastman had 2 3-year terms. He's next at 6. And David Crombie had 5 years as Toronto's mayor. He left a little bit early in his last term to run in a by-election in Toronto. So you have been one of the longest-serving mayors in the history of this city, and therefore we want to look back at the record a little bit. Here's what you had to say last year when you announced that you weren't going to run for re-election. You said, "I have accomplished what I set out to do. And so if I ran again, it would be about me and my electoral success and not about the Toronto I love." In 2006, I ran with an ambitious agenda to transform Toronto for the 21st century. It was called Toronto 2010. Today, every major policy that was at the foundation of my campaign has been accomplished or is well underway. So let's start there. Like what?
For example, when I first got elected, we were shipping our garbage to Michigan. People have forgotten, but we had a garbage crisis, and we've changed that completely by new policies, the pay-as-you-throw, the new bins, the recycling efforts, and of course we own our own landfill. Public transit, there wasn't even a plan to accommodate the 21st century needs of this city. We not only developed a plan, Transit City, construction's underway, investing in neighborhoods through our priority neighborhood strategy, investing in the economic success of Toronto, public safety. Crime's down significantly since I first became mayor because of deliberate strategies about investing in young people and deliberate strategies in partnership with Chief Bill Blair about getting police on the streets in neighborhoods that are most at risk. I could go on,
okay.
But I'm very proud of that legacy, and I think if you look back at almost every single council meeting, we accomplished more than had probably been accomplished since amalgamation.
Okay, but you know the job, the job of building a city is never done.
Oh, of course
right?
not, no.
So, and your polling numbers, from what I've heard, are actually pretty good right now.
60% is not bad.
60% approval rating?
Yes.
Now, have you done these surveys where if they throw your name into the mix with Rob Ford and George Smitherman and Joe Pantalone, where do you come out?
I haven't done that, but they've been done, and they show that I'd win.
So why not run again?
I truly meant what I said, and it's two things. First of all, I had a very ambitious agenda. That's what interested me. That's why I ran for mayor. I wanted to clean up the government. I wanted to build the city. I wanted to put Toronto on the right path. And as a Torontonian, that's very important to me, let alone an elected official. And I've done that. And the second reason's a personal one. You know, I have a young family, well, maybe not so young anymore. Both my kids were born after I was first elected, and if I serve another term, they'll be in university, and I will never have been home 2 nights in a row, ever. And I don't want to be that kind of dad, and there's not much time left for me to actually be there for my kids when they need me.
Let me take a minute here, because every politician says that, but some of our viewers may not know. How old were you when your father died? 1.5. You never knew your father?
I never knew my father. And it's something that's, my mom was extraordinary. You know, she was this little 5 foot 1.5 inch ball of fire from England who brought me to Canada. And every chance I've had is because she was absolutely devoted to making sure I had every chance in life. But one of the things I resolved was that I never had a father. I would be a good father. And frankly, I haven't been there. And it's time for me to be there. And you know, it's actually a physical craving, and I'm sure you understand. It's a physical craving to be there with my kids and see their successes and help them through their challenges.
So you stopped being mayor when?
November 30th at midnight.
So December 1st is Family Day.
December 1st is Family Day, and December 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th.
Okay. Let's go through some of the record then. You've heard this before. Even though you're not running, many people see the candidates running in this election and the events as they have unfolded as somehow a referendum on your years. And here's what Angelo Persichilli wrote in the Star recently. I'm sure you read this. The October 25 vote is not about Ford. It's a referendum on outgoing Mayor David Miller and his cronies. The campaign is about 4 things: the repudiation of Miller's vision of Toronto, the revolt of the suburban colonies, the frustration of people in the downtown core, and the inability of the other candidates to understand the first 3 of these factors. Miller's administration is identified with traffic jams that are fouling the environment, a special relationship with the unions, and friendly, costly contractors. The garbage strike, which exposed his lack of leadership, waste, tax increases, and most of all, the typical in-your-face attitude of a messiah who thinks he can disregard the opinions of his ignorant subjects. I'm going to go out on a wild limb here and say you're not completely on side with everything Angelo said here, but let's pick this apart a little bit. That Rob Ford is doing so well is a repudiation of you, to which you say what?
Well, I think, first of all, Toronto's complicated, and I don't agree, and I actually didn't read that article. I took some advice from one of North America's best mayors a few years ago and stopped reading the press unless it was really important. Richard Daley.
Oh, from Chicago, okay.
He said to me, "You don't read the newspapers, do you?" Mr. Perskilly is dead wrong, and the polls show it, and that's neither here nor there. Polls are only polls, but more importantly, the investments that we've made, for example, in acquiring new land for parks, in building the Shepherd LRT, and a number of other initiatives, are primarily in suburban areas like Scarborough. That's the truth. And we're addressing gridlock in the only way you can, which is by providing better public transit service. We've completely replaced the bus fleet. We've had the biggest increase in TTC bus service in the history of the TTC, and we've done that twice. And those buses all go in the suburbs. And if you ride the buses every day, you understand that there's more and better service. And that's not true of somebody who writes columns for the Toronto Star. And people forget, Jane Pitfield, who ran on a very hard right campaign, got about 33% of the vote.
Defeated by you last time.
Yes. And the people who supported Jane Pitfield disagree with what I stand for. What I stand for is investing in our city, is dealing with the downloading and the cost pressures of amalgamation by not cutting services and by finding new revenues. And I told people I would. I was very upfront about this. I said we're going to try to be modest with your taxes, but we will increase them, and we are going to use the new City of Toronto Act to bring in new revenues so that we can keep maintaining services. That's who I am. And there are people who don't agree with that.
Okay, but it's not, well, I shouldn't say. Humor me for a second here. Is it such a stretch to say you can't have Bob Rae as Premier unless it's a repudiation of David Peterson? You don't get Mike Harris because he's a repudiation of Bob Rae. If we get Rob Ford next Monday, I mean, there's got to be a percentage of that that's a repudiation of you.
I guess I don't see it fully that way. I think there's a lot of nuance to this. And sure, Mr. Ford stands for things that I don't stand for, and that's quite clear. But I also think that commentators are overlooking some important things. Like people in this city, working class people, are really worried. And they're worried about the fact that their hours have been cut back. They're worried about the fact if they work in the manufacturing industry or their family does, they may have lost their job or somebody in their family has. And they're very nervous. That's true whether it's somebody running in a municipal election or a provincial election, which is far less about what we've been doing in the city the past few years and more about an overall issue that we really need to grapple with in this city. And the way I've tried to deal with it is build jobs in Canada. We're making our streetcars and our subway cars in Canada because that's how we bring jobs to people who need them the most. Others have a different way of dealing with that.
Well, Rob Ford does. He says we overpaid for those
and says
as a result.
Well, it's totally false. That's complete made-up nonsense based on what the lobbyist for the losing bidder was advocating, whose bid was $500 million more than Bombardier's on the streetcar purchase, for example.
All right, but let me try this, though. Vehicle registration tax, land transfer tax, new user fees for water and garbage, other city services. You came into office as a bit of a champion for the working class in this city. Can you forgive them if they feel as if they are overtaxed right now because of 7 years of Miller?
Well, first of all, if you're a tenant, which many, many people in the working class are,
sure,
your taxes have been cut under my administration. And yes, it's true that we brought in user fees for garbage, but that actually helps people, for example, seniors who live in a house which market value assessment makes their taxes go up every year. We don't get any more money out of that as a city government. A senior who is in those circumstances is helped considerably by taking all of the costs of garbage off the tax base and paying on a pay-per-throw because they don't produce very much garbage. So the impact isn't at all as is being suggested. Motor vehicle tax, fair enough. That's something that people are struggling with. If I'd been running, what I would have been saying is we're putting that money into your roads. You're getting better roads and potholes, and because you're the owner of a car, it's fair that you pay. But the other things I would strongly disagree with. Tenants in this city are paying less, but they don't see the taxes directly, of course. So it's a harder story to tell politically. And if you're a working class person who uses the transit system, Your service is the best it's ever been, and that's why the TTC has the highest ridership ever. The last recession, ridership plummeted. It's up this time. Why? Because of deliberate policies the TTC under Adam Giambroni's leadership and with my support brought in to ensure that people could have passes that they could use around their family, giving them much more value, and we provided the service that people needed.
I don't know how much of a look back kind of a guy you are, but I'm going to guess at some point in the next little while you're going to look back at the last 7 years and say what could I have done differently or better or whatever. And you know where I'm going. I got to ask you about the garbage strike because
Sure.
I think most people I talk to think that had it not been for that, your legacy, your record as mayor would have been a whole hell of a lot better. And they look at that and they say, if not for that, and he really blew it there. Did your special relationship with the unions affect in an adverse fashion how you turned out to handle that thing?
No, I think it's the other way around. I would have hoped that the fact that my family comes from a union background, my uncle after he left the military was a sort of labor arbitrator, for example, in the federal public service. We lived with him when I was first in Canada, so I've always understood these issues. My English uncle was a member of a union, my mum was as well, would have helped avoid the strike. That wasn't to be, and there's lots of analysis about it, but I think if you go back and look at what Ann Dembinski was saying, for example, the leader of the Inside Workers, she was saying an arbitrator just gave the police, men in uniform, 12% over 3 years. I'm representing women who are working in homes for the aged who don't make very much money. I can't settle for less than that. And in the midst of a recession, that's just not possible for us. What history will show is that the city saved $172 million through the agreement we reached to settle the strike.
That's one thing it will show. It will also show that it went on longer than a lot of people wanted it to.
Sure, I didn't want to strike at all. I mean, I would be much happier if we hadn't had one and the unions had agreed to what we offered at the time. And the commentary at the time didn't mention that or support our position, but I don't believe any reasonably informed person who understands labor relations could hold an opinion other than that the city did exceptionally well in the settlement that ended the strike. Should there have been a strike in the first place? No, I didn't go on strike. The unions did. They weren't wise. I disagreed with them, and we managed it to the absolute best we possibly could.
But I guess some people wonder whether or not, because you were seen as an ally of unions going in, you bent over just a little extra backwards to give it a little more time to find that solution. Whereas, if you talk to the guys nowadays, you talk to Ford or Smitherman, the first thing they say is, day one of this thing, we're going to court. We're getting an injunction, we're getting these guys back on the job.
Well, you can't do that. That's a ludicrous thing for anybody who knows anything about government to say. The city doesn't have the power to do that. The federal and provincial governments have the power to legislate wages. The city doesn't. We have to bargain under provincial process.
Go to court and get an injunction to send them back force them back to work.
You can't do that, Steve. That's not legally possible.
I'm just telling you what Ford said in one of the debates.
Well, the fact that Councillor Ford says that something that is not remotely true is not a surprise, but that's not possible.
Okay.
We handled the strike in the best possible way. And one of the things I was trying to do was not attack the workers, because I knew the workers supported our view, and I wanted the workers to put pressure on the union in order to go back to work. And that's in fact what happened through our unusual making our bargaining position public. We actually brought an end to the strike and a settlement the city could afford. If we'd had the province legislate, you just saw in the newspaper this week, for example, a settlement with university professors that the universities can't afford. Mm-hmm. If the province had legislated people back to work, you would have got a settlement the city couldn't afford. And that was what I was trying to avoid at all costs. We had to have something that was affordable, because a strike plus budget cuts the next year would have been a disaster.
Oh, I get that. Let me ask one last thing about this, and that is just about you personally. I mean, you came into office, a champion of the working person, a guy who'd run for the NDP in the past. You're a union guy. And this year they told you, we don't want you at our Labor Day parade. We don't want you marching with us. And you're not exactly a friend of Bay Street's either, even though you are a Bay Street lawyer. You were a Bay Street lawyer before you came in. Are you, in the same way that, after Bob Ray brought in the social contract and then lost all his union support, but Bay Street didn't trust him anymore either, are you kind of out there by yourself right now politically, in some respect? You know what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, well, sure, I understand where you're getting at. The exact opposite seems to be true. I mean, I'm in every neighborhood in Toronto every day, and I'll tell you what people are saying to me in the context of the election, which is, please run. And even when I say I'm not on the ballot and I can't get on the ballot, they say, I don't care. In fact, some of them put it in rather colorful language that I can't repeat on television.
Go ahead.
But,
it's an adult show.
Well, a guy the other night said, don't effing leave us. And you know, his perspective is the one I'm hearing, that people don't like what they're seeing and they're worried, and they actually like a Toronto where people invest in public services, where people celebrate the arts, for example, celebrate diversity, and celebrate the city. And that's the kind of city they want to see and live in, and that's the kind of city they believe in, and that's the kind of mayor they want to vote for. And frankly, that's the kind of mayor they've had.
We got a few minutes left. Let me do a few more things here. Everybody remembers, or to the extent everybody followed this, they remember in 2003, your first election, holding that broom up. You're going to go in there and clean up City Hall. Is City Hall any cleaner today as a result of 7 years of your leadership?
Absolutely.
How so?
Well, as you know, Steve, and people may have forgotten, there was a very significant corruption scandal, which Ann Johnson and I and a councillor named Baz Balkinsoon had helped expose when we were councillors. That involved MFP, that actually involved politicians taking payoffs in the parking lot. It involved civil servants, and it was outrageous. We've cleaned up the whole system, eliminated a layer of the civil service. We've changed the way the civil service is run. We now have an integrity commissioner, an ombudsman, a lobbyist registrar. No city in Canada has a lobbyist registrar, and no city in Canada has an integrity commissioner. Only one other city has an ombudsman, and that's Montreal. It's night and day, and you can tell that from the media.
Speaking of media, full-page headlines, front-page headlines. Somebody spends $12,000 of taxpayers' money to give himself a farewell party.
So which may or may not have been appropriate, although if you spoke to that councillor, he would argue very strenuously about the huge amounts of money that he had put into the city through his campaign. But that's neither here nor there. If you look at the real issues that the press calls scandals nowadays, it was a couple of councillors using a few $100s to support a community event, which is perfectly within the rules and has been within the rules for 50 years.
They don't like the rules.
Well,
people don't like the rules.
Maybe they don't like the rules, but it can hardly be compared to people stealing from the city. You know, we're an institution now that runs to the highest ethical standards. I'm very proud of that, and was very important to me. One of the things, you know, we haven't talked about, speaking of that, is the federal and provincial governments. You know, when I first got elected, federal and provincial governments did not invest systematically in Toronto. In fact, it was the other way around. We'd had downloading, and if you look back at what my predecessor said, very upset that he couldn't even get a check from the federal government when they'd promised the money. Through a systematic strategy of me as Mayor of Toronto leading a coalition of mayors across this country, we've got an investment of billions in Toronto and billions more across this country through the Paul Martin government and continue with the Stephen Harper government. Those things matter. That's why we have new buses, new subway cars, and we're rebuilding the infrastructure of this city, going to have new streetcars, transit city. And it was systematic and deliberate, and we couldn't have done that if we were still a government under the cloud of scandal, because we wouldn't have been able to build those partnerships.
One last thing. You've had the job for 7 years. You're going to get a replacement coming in pretty soon. What's the most important thing the next mayor needs to know about being mayor of Toronto?
Well, I think the most important thing for the next mayor to do is build on the work we've been doing in the priority neighborhoods of Toronto. And having heard the rhetoric in this campaign, I'm very concerned, because the first thing that goes when people have tax freezes is the investments in people who have the least, because they're not very powerful. And this city is an extraordinary city, but we've been starting to become a city of haves and have-nots. And that's not a Canadian value, it's not a Toronto value. We believe in social justice and equality. And without investing in neighborhoods that have the least, we're going to go on a very bad path. And the most important thing, whoever it is can do, is find a way to build on those investments, whether it's with the private sector like I've done with Microsoft in Rexdale, whether it's with the public sector like we've done in Scarborough with TCHC, or whether it's with the province. We need to build significantly on those investments. That should be the #1 task of whoever the next mayor is.
It's good of you to come in. We always enjoy your times here in the studio, and we hope you'll come back in future, even after we stop calling you Your Worship.
It would be a pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks to David Miller.